All right. Good morning, everyone, or more like good afternoon. So we're now on session 3 of day 5. We are on goal number 11, which is sustainable cities and communities. And I'm really excited to be joined today by Chris Davies from Harvest London. So a little bit of background. I came across Chris and his team's work about 8 months ago. And we had the very good fortune of Chris joining us at a weekend accelerator that we ran around sustainability. So it made perfect sense for you guys to definitely hear Chris's story and all the wonderful, innovative things that I believe Harvest London is doing. So, Chris, welcome.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
I'm very pleased that you're joining us today. So, I know you've got a lot to share about what Harvest London is doing, so I'll let you jump straight in.
Hi.
There you go. Yeah, we can hear you now.
Great. Should I start? Sorry, there was a little bit of
Nope.
lag on my side.
That's okay. So I just introduced you and then I said, Chris, I know you've got a lot to share with people about Harvest London, so I'll let you get started.
Great. Thank you very much, Nimisha. Um, Hi, everyone. Happy to be here. Let me start by giving a quick introduction on myself, and I'll tell you a little bit about Harvest London and how we're hoping to achieve or helping to achieve the SDG, particularly SDG 11. Prior to starting Harvest London, I spent 10 years in management consulting, really working with large scale organizations to help improve their business processes, very similar to what Nimisha and Ben are doing or have done. And really, it's the combination of my background as well as my passion for food and sustainability that allowed us to, or that made us want to start a company like Harvest London. Going into starting the business, I knew next to nothing about agriculture, and particularly high-tech agriculture. Luckily, my business partner knows everything about that side of things. So when we met, we started Harvest London really back in early 2018. And we've been going from strength to strength since then. But enough about us, and let's talk about SDG 11 and how something like Harvest London can help. So we all know that there's been a massive increase in urbanization and people living in cities and moving into cities. 2050, 9.8 billion people are expected to live on this planet, with between 70 to 80% of those living in cities. That obviously means that these cities have a lot of potential to do a lot of good, but it's also a lot of potential to essentially be a massive suck of resources from not only its surrounding areas, but also globally. In terms of the UK itself, one of the effects of London and a lot of the other cities in our country is the sustainability of the food supply that we have. 30 years ago, the UK produced about 80% of its own food. Today, that's down to about 60%. Right, so we're becoming, with the increase in our population growth, we're becoming less and less self-sufficient in terms of the food that we're able to consume in this country. Not only are we becoming less efficient, we're also becoming more and more dependent on particularly the EU. 50% of all the vegetables that we consume in this country comes from Europe. 90% of all the fruit that we consume in this country comes from Europe, mostly from Spain, because they enjoy the nicer climate. That obviously has downstream impacts in terms of the quality of the produce that we get, the nutrition of the produce that we get, but also there are these structural impacts in terms of food waste, for example, right? I'm sure we've all experienced this, but when we go into a grocery and we buy a bag of salad leaf, we take out a little bit for our current meal, and within half a day, the rest of that salad has become kind of soggy and gross in the fridge. That's because of this structural system that we put in place where food has to come from very far away. That's why the bags of salad that we buy there's gas in there that keeps the produce fresh and keeps it green. And that's really because of the length of the supply chain that the food has to go through. In terms of a little bit more kind of facts around that, in terms of that bagged salad, this country actually throws away about 40% of all the bagged salad that we buy. That's equivalent to about 37,000 tons of salad leaf that just gets thrown away.
I mean, I can
Um,
vouch for that. We do that in this house as well. Like with all intents and purposes, right? We're like, we'll eat it. And then for exactly the reason you described, we end up throwing most of it away because it just goes off. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the food waste, the structural impact on food waste is huge, right? We throw away, of all food that we consume, we throw away about between 14 to 17% of all food just gets wasted. So we think that there needs to be a fundamental step change in terms of, and I just wanted to mention this article, this slide. This is a really, really good article that we found on, it was actually on The Guardian, but it's based off of the FAO site, where they did a lot of analysis on the amount of imports and exports that this country enjoys. As you can see from this, we're importing a lot of lettuce and chicory, but this is a really, really good article, which I'm happy to share afterwards, that just shows the extent of this problem and how dependent we are on the rest of the EU. One of the key, if you guys remember, prior to this whole COVID-19 craziness, Brexit was, we were all talking about Brexit. And one of the key things that kind of made us realize that actually there's something here and we wanted to start a company like Harvest London is this dependency on the EU, that we were kind of shooting ourselves in the foot by saying, 80 to 90% of all the food that we consume comes from the EU, and yet we want to separate ourselves from those structures, which didn't make sense to us. But moving on, we think that there needs to be a fundamental step change in terms of how food is produced and how food is consumed everywhere. There's no single answer. This does need to be a systematic change in terms of how food is produced and consumed. We believe that one of those answers is vertical farming. But we're not going to get away from the fact that there needs to be drastic changes in terms of traditional farming, traditional operations. We'll see that there is so much potential in improving not only improving traditional farming through the use of technology by using something like vertical farming, but there's also drastic improvements that can be made in, for example, land use and soil efficiency and soil quality. Yeah.
We did a little switcheroo there. Hey, Chris, my name's Cameron, and it's
Hi, Cameron.
Just what you've been talking about already. I'm super engaged because you've just been hitting the nail on the head, and I'm really curious about your project. So I don't want to get in your way, but I might ask some questions here and there.
Please do. Please do.
Thank you.
So I think I might have jumped the gun there by talking about vertical farming, but Harvest London is fundamentally a vertical farming organization. We produce rare herbs and rare vegetables for the London chef and restaurant market. And we really work with our customers to improve the sustainability of their supply chain. We're firm believers that vertical farming is one of the key areas in which we can address the challenges of feeding 9.8 billion people. there needs to be a fundamental step change and a massive increase in our production capacity per capita because of the amount of people that are being born, but also land is a finite resource. Water is a finite resource. We believe that vertical farming addresses a lot of those key issues with traditional agriculture. I won't go into every single one of these, but a couple of the ones that we're quite passionate about. Water is one. 70% of the world's water, of the world's fresh water, is used in agriculture, and 60% of that is being wasted just because of the spray and pray nature, because of defective irrigation, because of inefficient use. And obviously water is a finite resource. We're also very quite passionate about the reduction of fertilizer, herbicides, and pesticides. 98% of all insecticides and herbicides reach a destination that is not the intended destination, right? The intended destination on the field is, a small pest, a small bug. But we know from what's happening with bees, and we know what's happening with fertilizer runoff, that it hits a lot of other areas which isn't desired. And that's because of the nature of traditional agriculture and how it's very much spray and pray. Cameron.
Yeah, I mean, on this note of traditional agriculture and the scarcity of land and water, traditional agriculture is like speeding that up as well. It's destroying land, which is destroying the water tables. So the more food we make, the less room we have to make it. From what
Absolutely
I
right.
gather, yeah.
So, to give you an idea of the benefits of vertical farming, right? So, as compared to traditional farming, vertical farms have the potential to produce 350 times the amount of produce as traditional agriculture. And that is a result of a couple of things. It's a result of the vertical nature and the fact that we're growing indoors in stacks, but it's also because of the intensiveness of growing. What I mean by that is the light, we use a lot of LED lights in our growing, and our LED, depending on what we grow, our LED lights are on about 22 hours a day. So, there's a lot more sunlight fundamentally, right? So we're able to grow a lot more in that small amount of space. In addition to being able to produce 350 times the amount of produce, we're able to do that using 95% less water, 95% less fertilizer, and 100% pesticide free. Now, those are pretty big claims, but those are claims that a traditional agriculture can definitely not say. Even if you're a 100% organic farm, for example, you're still using organic fertilizers.
Yeah, exactly. I was reading about that today actually, and it's quite interesting that some of the organic fertilizers or even pesticides, which are still allowed under the organic label, are still not good for us. So you can get some totally organic fruit that's been covered in an organic chemical compound, which is still going to mess you up.
Absolutely. Like, it's definitely a problem globally, but if you guys remember, in the US about a year and a half ago, there was a big problem with E. coli in their lettuce and coming out of California. And they actually banned and stopped importing lettuce out of California. Vertical farms in the US took that as an opportunity, because vertical farms at the US actually claim that you don't ever even need to wash the produce that comes out of the vertical farms, because it's grown in a clean environment, because it's grown without any pesticides whatsoever. You don't even need to wash it before using it, which is a pretty big step. I would still wash it personally, but it's a pretty big step change from going from an E. coli risk to not having to wash any vegetables at all. Just touching on some of these other things, talking about the impacts of vertical farming within cities. One of my favorite, and this is also what drew me to vertical farming. Traditional farming is a pretty old, let's say, an old industry, right? It's it's older people that have the interest. It's older people that are engaging in traditional farming. And because vertical farming has come, and it's this kind of middle ground between sustainability, technology, and agriculture, it's engaging a whole new generation of people. It's engaging a whole new set of young people who might not have considered, traditional agriculture, but are looking to, because of the technology nature of it, they find vertical farming quite interesting. Creating local jobs and transitioning jobs from far away into local is very, very important. Repurposing vacant buildings is another really interesting side of things. With COVID-19, in addition, having to rethink what office buildings are doing, having to rethink what open spaces are doing to really address some of the challenges that our cities face. We're quite proud of the fact that Harvest London, we've always used renewable energy. So one of the challenges of vertical farming, which is the fact that while we are very good from a water intensiveness perspective, we're very good from not using pesticides, we are very energy intensive because of the LEDs.
Yeah.
We're very proud of the fact that all the energy that we use comes from renewable energy. And at some point in the future, we do have this plan of actually producing our own energy rather than just using renewable energy.
So you use renewable energy from a grid source. Nice. But you want to actually have like solar panels, which are basically just channeling it directly to the plants.
Absolutely right. I'll touch on that slightly later on, and I have a pretty good story about how vertical farming can be incorporated into what the fabric of a city. So we'll touch on that a little bit more later on. So what is Harvest London's vision is really all about transforming the sustainability and biodiversity of the food in our cities. We've touched on a little bit about the sustainability nature of that. From the biodiversity angle is very, very interesting, right? Today, just 12 crops and 5 animal species make up 75% of the global calorie intake.
Wow.
Right? If you think about that, that is by definition a very unresilient food system, right? Because all of our calories come from 12 plants. If we think about the number of, we walk into a Sainsbury's or a Tesco and we can buy probably maybe 30 different things, but think about the number of plants that are out there that could be used as a food source, which just aren't right now because, for example, we can't get it in this country, right? And being able to open up other sources of food, we're quite passionate about. We also know that traditional agriculture, because it's outdoors, plants, and this is where the very big pharmaceutical and chemical companies come in. 98% of the entire globe's seed source is controlled by the Monsantos, the Dow companies, and they do a lot of research and they do a lot of good, but the fact that it's controlled by a very small amount of people is obviously
scary, yeah. Yeah.
But
just a quick one, just so I maybe can understand. Are you saying that using vertical farming, would you be able to take, let's say, like a tomato, which is native to Sicily, and create an environment for it where it can grow and then be able to, have like your partners at restaurants enjoy real Sicilian tomatoes?
Absolutely, right?
Oh, nice.
That actually touches on, one of our major customers is a London pizza chain. They historically have bought all of their basil from Italy, from the hills of Italy, or Italy in the summer or Israel in the winter. And just like in the UK, how we have the concept of a Cornish pasty, and in order to be a Cornish pasty, it needs to be made in Cornwall. There is also DOP, what is called DOP basil, which means it's basil that has been grown in the hills of Italy. And you can't call your basil DOP basil unless it's grown in that area. But with this customer of ours, we actually proved to them that there's nothing particularly special about DOP basil. We used the exact same seed that is used in Italy, and we grew it in our warehouse in East London. And just the very fact that, so we did some calculations for that customer, and by switching their supply chain to us, to Harvest London, we are saving them at least 150,000 food miles per year.
Wow.
And from a quality perspective, basil is one of those plants that, and this is why basil is sold in pots in Sainsbury's, right? Because the moment you pick basil, it loses a lot of its pungency. It loses a lot of its taste. There you go. Which is why, you know, fresh basil is very, very important. So from a quality perspective, the fact that it's been grown in East London was significantly better than the DOP basil that they got, because it didn't need to travel from Italy anymore.
Yeah, exactly.
So
it's fresh.
we actually, today, we go from harvest to delivery in 4 hours. And all of our crops are within about 20 miles of all the restaurants that we service.
That's
a
phenomenal.
fundamental step change in terms of, traditionally, like we spoke about salad leaf earlier, but traditionally, on average, the produce that we consume travels 1,500 miles and spends 11 weeks in the supply chain.
Oh man.
Right? So we go, using vertical farming, we go from that to 4 hours and 20 miles.
Nice.
But you know, the Sicilian tomato is a really good example, right? Because all of the seeds that we use are still designed for outdoor use, right? So that means that they, and not only designed for outdoor use, but also designed because, you know, the market has defined that ugly produce is undesirable. So those seeds are designed for pest resistance. They're designed to be very uniform in shape. With the advent of vertical farming, we can start to challenge some of those ideas. If there's no pests in my environment, why does the tomato need to be pest resistant? Right. Instead of the tomato spending the energy to become pest resistant, what else can we get that energy? What else can we use that energy for? We can use it for taste. We can use it for color. And so there's a lot of very, very interesting research in terms of how vertical farming can impact the sustainability and biodiversity. So another really good example is taste, exactly, right? Another really good example is, you know, think about the number of heirloom vegetables that we just don't get anymore because they're shaped weird, or we just don't have the seed stock in order to be able to grow them at scale. Yeah. One of the things that we are trying to do is revive some of those heirloom varietals, so that we're opening up the biodiversity of our food systems.
This is awesome. Keep going, man. Keep going.
So we're very proud of the fact that we as an organization, by the very nature of what we do, impacts a lot of the SDGs. You know, we've already spoken about how it impacts how we can use vertical farming to address hunger, clean water. We're obviously here to discuss sustainable cities and communities. In order to do that, I'm going to tell a story about a very interesting project that we got involved in. And this is really about the story of transforming Smithfield Market. Wow. So we're all familiar, if the people on the call are based in London, Smithfield near the Barbican, one of the world's oldest meat markets. And there is a City of London plan to repurpose that. You know, the traditional food markets of London, like things like Covent Garden Market and Spitalfields Market, have moved just outside of London now because of, you know, the expensiveness of the property that they sit on. And Smithfield is facing that exact same challenge. So Harvest London got involved with one of the architecture firms that put a bid to transform Smithfield Market, to transform it. And this is quite a cool little ironic twist that they wanted to put on it. what is one of the world's oldest meat markets, transform it into one of the world's biggest and most high-tech vegetable production facilities. So all of Smithfield Market was going to become this center of excellence for local sustainable food production. I think this had some incredible opportunities for how to illustrate how cities can become more self-sustaining in terms of the food that it produces for itself, as well as the nature of how it tries to re-educate the population in terms of that. So to give you an idea, in vertical farming, we produce a lot of very good, produce. You have tomato. The domain is really kind of the green leafy vegetables. So it produces a lot of very tasty lettuce and high quality lettuce and salad leaves and tomatoes and cucumbers. But it also generates a lot of, it necessitates lots of power, lots of energy. It needs a lot of heat to keep it warm. It also produces a lot of organic waste. Think about the roots and the stems of the leaves and all of that sort of thing. So the vision for transforming Smithfield was all about the circularity of inputs and the circularity of the waste. So if you think about how Smithfield sits within its surrounding environment, it's about integrating food production into the fabric of the city. So some of the ideas that we were exploring was taking excess heat from the buildings surrounding Smithfield and pumping that into the farm so that we didn't need to heat the farm ourselves. Some of the other ideas was we produce a lot of, as I said, organic waste, taking that organic waste, sticking it into an anaerobic digester, which then produces more heat. It produces electricity, so you're offsetting some of your electric cost. And it also produces a lot of CO2, which we can pump into the farm because plants need the CO2.
There you go.
And it's really about, putting that into the middle of our city and being, it's rethinking that mixed use nature, right? When we think about mixed use development, we would always, historically, we would think about mixed use as, both residential and commercial. But we believe that the direction of travel of this industry, mixed use, is also going to involve, the leisure industry with the open space and retail and all of that kind of stuff, but also local food production.
That's a beautiful vision. I'm incredibly pumped about it.
I wish I came up with it.
You kind of did in a way, but yeah, it's just an amazing depiction of. I think the important thing here too is just to put it in the public eye, so that
Absolutely.
kids especially, see it and then they want to try it. You know what I mean?
And that was, you're touching on another one of those things that we're quite passionate about is, you ask a kid where their tomato comes from, and they're going to say Sainsbury's. They're going to say Tesco.
Yeah.
And it's that re-education of what does it actually mean? Where does your food actually come from? How is food actually produced? And that re-education brings people back together and understands, what it takes to feed a city, the global population of 9.8 billion. But here's also an indication of how big this problem might be, right? So Smithfield we've done all the calculations for how much produce could a Smithfield produce, right? The UK in 2018 consumed 4.5 million tons of fresh produce, right? Smithfield is about, in terms of growing space, is about 120,000 square meters, square feet, 120,000 square feet. That would be about 1.5 times the world's biggest vertical farm at the moment, right? And even then, Smithfield will only produce 0.5%.
That's not bad though. I was expecting less.
Not bad.
That's a lot of produce.
But if you think about the scale of the problem,
yeah, we need 200 more.
Exactly, absolutely, right?
But that's manageable, actually. I mean, you've seen what it's taking to do this project, and it must be so much. But having 200 of these, and plus incorporating that with, homegrown solutions, it's like it sounds doable. Difficult, but doable.
Difficult but doable, absolutely. The world leaders in this are the Dutch. The Dutch are masters of, so vertical farming is the technical term for vertical farming is controlled environment agriculture, right? Because everything is controlled within the farm. But you don't necessarily need to be vertical to be controlled environment, right? A glass house, a greenhouse is also a controlled environment.
Yeah.
The Dutch are one of the smallest countries in the world, but they are the second largest producer of fresh produce in the world, only next to the Americans. And that's because of, you fly over the Netherlands and everything is glass houses, right? They grow everything in glass houses. So they're able to produce a lot in a very small amount of space. I just wanted to touch on the fact that, based on the fact that we're able to integrate this into into the fabric of a city has even further downstream impact. It's not only the fact that we are not importing as much, but it's also the fact that from the challenge of getting food into cities in and of itself is a problem. We're all familiar, or hopefully we're all familiar with the fact that, the challenge of the supply chain isn't in getting food from Spain to the UK. The challenge is getting it from the port specifically to the last mile, right?
Yeah.
So the fact that food production happens very, very locally means that getting the food to actually where it's consumed becomes much, much easier as well.
Yeah.
And we can cut off a lot of those food miles.
I mean, just going back to the Dutch example, it's kind of an interesting metaphor in a way, or an example for the world at large, right? The Dutch were like one of the biggest trading countries in the world, one of the biggest trading businesses, East India Trading Company, all that. And in not a long amount of time, it seems that they've gone from basically taking things from all around the world and redistributing them to on sailing boats, to their credit, to producing it locally,
Absolutely.
I mean, I guess they're still shipping it around, but at least it shows what's possible. I mean, the world now is so built around trade. And yeah, to go back to your very first point about how we kind of shot ourselves in the foot with the whole Brexit conversation, didn't really look ahead and realize that we actually need so much. Maybe this ethos is actually taking us in the right direction, in the sense that, localization, not nationalism, but localization.
Absolutely. I mean, that's very good segue to this next slide.
Oh, thank God.
I was gonna go, Cameron, where are you going with this?
just trying to, like tell the story here a little bit.
So, we've all been impacted by COVID-19. We've all been impacted by the challenges that's faced, walking into a grocery, seeing empty shelves. Not only has COVID-19 impacted, access to food, but we, in most countries, I would imagine that, not only is food not getting to us, but food is literally being wasted in the field, because it's not only impacted the movement of food, it's also impacted the movement of people, right? 98% of this country's produce pickers are not British, right? And this is why we face challenges of, having to specifically ship in Romanian people in order to pick produce, because apparently the British are too good to pick their own produce. So I think COVID-19 has really kind of stressed, to your point, the fact that we have built a totally globalized food system. We've built a totally where the lettuce that I buy from Spain is cheaper than the lettuce that I buy grown 5 miles away. And what that means for the, one of the things that they say is there's no such thing as a free lunch, or no such thing as a cheap lunch. Cheap food, there is still a cost to that. That cost might just be hidden to you because of the scale it's enabled, but there is that cost. And I think there's going to be a transition to a system that, while it's not nationalized, for certain things needs to be de-globalized, right? Where we're not shipping, I don't know, bottles of water from, the hills of Switzerland, or Fiji water shipped from Fiji, because it's crazy, it's mental. How is that an efficient use of all of the finite resources that we're all expecting? So there's obviously, I think, in a perverse way, COVID-19 has been obviously detrimental to most industries, but it's cemented our belief that we're on the right path, and we need to be instilling further resiliency into our own food system. We can't be fully dependent on a totally globalized system, because with pandemics, those food systems start to collapse, and those food systems start to be a challenge. We as a company, our main customers are restaurants, food groups, which has obviously been terribly impacted by COVID-19. But what's been really great to see is how these companies have come up with innovative ways of staying afloat and providing the service that they provide. And I know that once all this kind of really blows over, I'm going to really enjoy having a meal in a restaurant with my friends and all of that kind of stuff, right? And we're seeing the better impact of or the better a result. Hopefully we'll see a result that has it shows us an actual change in people's perception of where food has come from, and the food that they consume. So let's touch on like the bigger picture, right? One of the challenges and what that will solve the problem of world hunger is the fact that vertical farming, the most of the research in vertical farming is really on the renewable side of things. What they say is but until you start producing the starchier vegetables, the potatoes of the world, the sweet potatoes, the root vegetables, the root crops, those are the ones that are really going to impact solving world hunger, right? And there's a lot of research about starting to grow those root crops hydroponically. But I don't think we're in the per capita production of food, particularly the food that is very calorific, it's very starchy, and that's where most of the people of this food comes from. It's also quite a new technology, but if you think about the effect of new technology means that it's still quite expensive, right? So most of the world's vertical farms, most of the world's controlled environment agriculture happens in Western Europe, North America, Japan. But if you think about how the same technology, when it experiences a decrease in its cost, can be brought to Africa, can be brought to Southeast Asia. Right now, even though it is quite a rich area, the Middle East, the Middle East is in an even worse position than the UK, where all the produce of the food that they consume has to be imported in. Food doesn't grow in the desert. Well, if you can imagine a big controlled environment agriculture farm, a big vertical farm in the middle of the desert, leveraging the resources that they have with lots of sun, able to produce their own food. So we really we're hoping that we're starting to see how this this technology is going to start breaking down food deserts. It's going to start breaking down and giving poorer countries a good source of nutritious food rather than it being imported or it just being at a small hole. We really need that step change in terms of how food is produced.
How do you see that working in the sense that, I mean, the technology that you're using probably, like, you're able to make a sort of sustainable business based on your customer base. And so in London, people can afford to, pay whatever you need to charge them. But how would it work in Ethiopia? Like, how would it be like a 1-for-1 model where every one farm in the UK would somehow pay for a farm somewhere else?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so one of the big challenges of vertical farming, as I've already mentioned, is the energy intensiveness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like there are vertical farms out there that don't buy their energy from renewable sources and are actually quite detrimental, right? But if you think about a holistic model where, for example, another flavor of vertical farming is container farming, right?
Yeah.
Repurposing old shipping containers.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of really good research about how can you create an off-the-grid vertical farm container, right? Where the efficiency of the LEDs get to a point where one solar panel can actually run all the lights necessary, right? So doesn't need to be connected to the grid at all.
Yeah.
I would say that we're not quite there yet in terms of the efficiency of LEDs, the efficiency of the solar panels.
Yeah.
These things still cost quite a bit, but there are already organizations today vertical farming organizations where their outright focus is on poorer countries. In a really perverse way, fresh produce in those countries is actually even more expensive than the produce here.
Wow.
And that's because of the difficulty of getting it there, right? For us, we take for granted that we can get any crop we want any time of the year.
Yeah.
Right? When that's not how most of the
life
population
works.
Yeah, if I may jump in, I think that's actually a really important statement to make. Just from personal experience, like I've seen how we have so much accessible food here in supermarkets, which actually is grown in half these African countries. But if you go there, the same unit of that same produce is almost 10 times more expensive for the local person. And I think that is also a fundamental flaw in our global food system.
Absolutely, totally agree. This is another, touching on again that Smithfield project. This is that overall vision for that. But thinking about, the thing about cities is because of the quantum of people, the quantum of infrastructure, there's so much potential if we just rethink certain things. If we just rethink, we've already spoken about integrating into the fabric. We've already spoken about reusing waste CO2 and how we can, with slight changes to policy, we can make pretty significant changes in terms of how food is produced and consumed in our country. We've already also spoken about how this concept of mixed use is changing to incorporate local food production. We've also already spoken about how, by the intersection of technology and food production, we can re-energize young people's interest in food production. We can re-energize their interest in agriculture. But I do still think that there's a lot of work that our governments can do in order to encourage this sort of development. Unfortunately, now, while I love this project, it wasn't actually successful. Another proposal won the Smithfield redevelopment. But interestingly, vertical farming was also part of that winning bid. Not quite to the same degree as this, but I think, people's attitudes towards local food production is moving in the right direction, where they see that the food system that we've built for ourselves isn't necessarily the best. But going back to the point about how government, I think, can help, um, you know, it's still a very nascent industry. It still necessitates a lot of support, both from the public and private sector. There needs to be a step change in terms of, improvements to taxation, improvements to regulation, encouraging changes in the industry, encouraging local food systems, but also um, incentivizing companies with financial incentives to promote that transition to a more sustainable food system. So we're very passionate about working with, the GLA in terms of trying to show them, the negative impacts of the food system that we've built, and the vision of what a local food production system, or what a local food production system would mean for a city like London. That's all I have for now. Thank you very much for your time, but I'm more than happy to take questions from Cameron, Namisha, and anyone else.
Nice one. Well, just from my own side of things, like I missed the beginning. So is there like a certain spark that like set you off on this journey? Is there like a personal story, a personal experience where it just like clicked for you and you're like, all right, I have to do this?
Absolutely. Brexit, those things, like it blew my mind that we're so dependent on the EU.
Chris, I'm sorry we're losing you, buddy. There's a bit of a misconnection.
Research online and school now. You guys hear? Sorry.
All good. I would love to hear the story.
Hello.
Hey, we are here.
Your sound is better now, Chris. I think you're getting a bit of feedback, so it might help. Maybe, and apologies to the audience, it might help turning off your videos so that we don't have any crackling sound.
Or the screen share. Nice. All right. Hello.
Chris is dropped off.
He's gone. He'll be back.
He'll be back, yeah. But what did you think of that, Cameron?
Oh, it's marvelous. I mean, between what we heard from Farm Urban the other day, and then just the questions that we had been discussing and mulling over during Zero Hunger, and now this, which seems to be taking things to another scale, it's really hopeful, and I don't know. I mean, the repurposing of buildings for me is brilliant, and to see that depicted in these illustrations was like so inspiring.
I don't know if you knew, there are actually some London Underground disused tube stations that are being converted into vertical farms.
It's perfect, honestly. It seems like, somewhere between dystopic and utopic, people underground having to grow their vegetables, but better that we do it now than when we have to do it.
And I think for the benefit of the audience, there's also this really interesting story, which I'll quickly tell you guys while we get Chris back on. But I saw this really interesting video, which I'll share with everyone in the hub, about this 80-year-old retired gentleman who lived in Nebraska and built like a geo greenhouse, which is basically trapping heat from kind of like, what is it, heat exchange? I'm not getting the right words, but he basically put piping all through his like 7-8 acres of land, and it traps all the heat and kind of heats this greenhouse. And he was literally growing oranges in the middle of Nebraska in the winter. So I think, there's something to be said about also us really reframing the way we think about how we're growing our food. And his philosophy was totally, well, why should I grow on the land when I can grow underground and leave all of that land to, the rest of the animals and, like biodiversity that needs it. So yeah.
Exactly.
Chris, we were talking about London Underground giving some of its up for vertical farms. Yeah.
Absolutely. It's lucky that the internet conked out right at the end of that talk rather than during it. So
Yeah.
But we,
can you guys hear me? Okay?
yeah, we can hear
Yeah,
you really
much
well.
better.
Cameron, might be good for you to
Great.
ask that question again.
So the question again
But
was,
Cameron,
yeah, you got it.
to your question, as I said, Brexit was one of those things, but it was actually some of the R&D that excited me personally. So let me tell that story. So there's a lot of research. We're transitioning from a traditional where we're using the sun as the energy source to using LED lights as the energy source, right? But we obviously have a lot more control over the LED lights. So plants only actually consume red and blue light spectrum from the sun, right? Which is why if you walk into a vertical farm, most of them are bathed in this crazy pink light, right? Because if you produce light at other wavelengths, you're just wasting energy. But what they've discovered is, in basil's case, if you grow basil under more blue light than red light, you end up producing a spicier basil. So you're then starting to get into the realms of designer produce, where it's GMO without it being GMO. All you're doing is encouraging the natural mutations in plants to produce a spicier basil. And that's fascinating to me,
Yeah.
right? Imagine if by just controlling the nature, the environment that you're growing stuff in, you're actually impacting the end product that you're producing. And I think that's fascinating.
That's like alchemy. Other questions? Namisha, do you have any questions?
I have a question from the audience. They say that given Brexit and how you chose to set up the company, was it particularly challenging to try and set something like this up during a time when there was so much uncertainty with Brexit? Could you speak about that? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. We actually saw Brexit as an opportunity. It was a reason for us to start the company. And there is a recognition on the part of both local and national government that, yes, we are very dependent on external food systems or food systems that are beyond us. The way that the reason I'm saying they're quite supportive of this is if you look at the parts of government that are working with startups, that are working with young organizations or innovative organizations, there's a lot of support through organizations like Innovate UK, DEFRA, through organizations like that. They're very supportive of organizations like mine. There are lots of grants that you can apply for that is usually the first step in building a business like this. You can always do more, and in fact with COVID-19 they are doing more, but there's an argument that obviously not enough. But we saw Brexit as an opportunity, and I think particularly with vertical farming, it is quite a capital intensive business. You need the capital at the start of the process to actually build the farm that allows you to produce lots and lots of food. But at the same time, even though it is capital intensive, it's shocking how much food you can actually produce in such a small amount of space. So while it is capital intensive, it is quite profitable at the end of it as well. And it's about, from in terms of questions around starting the business, it's about doing your market research, doing your all the standard, like how do you start a business thing. And it's great to see that the London government and the wider government is very supportive of what they call novel food production systems, right? New ways of producing food.
Oh, I think that is very, very, I think it's the way forward. So, very interesting question that just extends on your credentials. When, obviously, so the question asks, it's nice to see a localized formation of food production that can service local businesses. What would you do if you started to get demand from outside of, say, London? And what kind of practices do you have in the pipeline to sort of offset that food miles that are traveled?
That's a great question. We are as I said earlier, the largest farms in the world are probably in that 70 to 80,000 square foot range, right? Um, our vision is not to build one of those farms. It's one, the logistical challenges of building a farm of that size are quite large, but also that produces a hell of a lot of food, to be perfectly honest. So rather than building a farm, just outside of London or in London, and just an 80,000 square foot farm just outside of London, what we'd rather do is build 10,000 square foot farms in and around centers of population. There's no point in building a farm in London for you to ship then to Birmingham, to ship then to Edinburgh and places like that, right? So rather than building one farm that is servicing a larger area, we would rather build smaller farms that are in and around centers of population. And that's the vision that we have. And the processes and systems and technology that we've built takes us down that path. So when I say that rather than building 100,000 square foot farm, let's build 10,000 square foot farms, I also mean that those 10,000 square foot farms are going to be connected, right? They're going to be connected via technology. They're going to be connected, so they're all learning from each other. And just because they're not in the same place, doesn't mean that they don't benefit from the economies of scale. So our vision is really to take what we've done in London and be able to lift and shift that to other areas. Edinburgh is probably the second place in the UK, nice, just because of their attitudes towards local food production and organic farming. But there's lots of scope in lots of different parts of the UK, and it's really about understanding those markets as to where to go next. But it's about templatizing our systems, templatizing our processes so that it's very easy to lift and shift to other areas.
Sounds about right. Yeah, I mean, I guess doing it as kind of hands-on as possible, give the technology to the most amount of people as possible, would also just change people's mentalities about it and feel like, oh, wow, we can do this ourselves and we don't have to rely on some outside source to feed us.
Yeah, and that brings us nicely on to the next question, actually. So they say, how helpful is it, for example, if a group of restaurateurs got together to advocate for a system like this? And on a ballpark, so I think what they're trying to ask is how many restaurants would you need to justify you putting a farm in a city?
That's a really good question. Very the question as well. The thing you'll see from is that restaurants as a whole is not one market, right? There are and this is actually how we talk to potential investors and stuff. You have the kind of restaurant, let's call a Michelin star chef, for example, right? A Michelin star chef, they have their signature, tomato dish, right? And it doesn't matter where that tomato comes from. I need to get that tomato. And if it comes from, Spain or Italy, doesn't matter. I'm a Michelin star chef and I'm going to get it. Food miles be damned, right? That's one kind of chef. The other kind of chef is the kind of chef that is going to develop relationships with local producers. It's going to develop relationships with, it's going to cook seasonally. And that's a different kind of chef. And it's the dichotomy of choice versus sustainability, right? The first guy has unlimited choice because they don't care where the food comes from. The second guy has limited choice, but is very sustainable. Now, and that's those are two very different ways. Another example of how the restaurant industry as a whole is fragmented is so those are two kinds of chefs. You then have different kinds of restaurant groups. So like we work with one restaurant group that has 15 stores, right? 15 restaurants. And they're very consistent. They're very consistent about stuff. So we're able to actually say, okay, each store needs one thing, but needs a lot of that one thing. And it's just about, so it's a difference between, to answer your question, when we started, we were very production constrained. We were literally turning customers. We started very small. We started with the production capacity to service 3 restaurants. Now, I'm not saying that that's a profitable business, but it gave us a foothold to be able to build on to the next ones. But because of the quality of produce, because of the fact that it doesn't travel very far, you end up producing very, very nice things. And we purposefully chose to differentiate ourselves from our competitors like Growing Underground. Growing Underground will grow 3 things, 3 kinds of salad leaf, stick it in a bag, and sell it in a Tesco. So their model is B2C. For us, we didn't want to go B2C, we wanted to go B2B directly. We were chefs. But chefs don't want the 3 random salad leaves. They want the weird, wonderful stuff that comes from very far away, lots of Mexican herbs, lots of Southeast Asian herbs. And we actually have developed the technology and the software and the understanding to grow over 100 different things in a controlled environment. And lots of weird, as I said, Mexican marigold, because we wanted to give those chefs the choice in terms of what they could get. We started small, and that's allowed us to grow. To the stage we're at now, and hopefully keep growing.
No, and I love that, because I think one of the things, if you don't mind me sharing, Chris, was also when we had you last time at one of our incubators, you actually talked about how chefs were kind of now, not completely, but starting to retrofit the menu a little bit to kind of, oh, well, actually, we didn't realize we could grow this at cheaper. So there's also that element of influence by just establishing a business like this, because you're also kind of reverse influencing what they cook rather than the other way around.
Yeah.
So another question from the audience is there a more economically viable version of a vertical farm that, say, could be deployed to schools and hospitals?
Absolutely. I mean, that's a really interesting question. One, I don't necessarily think that at small scale, it's about understanding your market, right? So hospitals, schools, we are talking to, while we say that we predominantly work with food groups, we're also talking to places like hospitals, schools, prisons that have this like market that they need to service. There's a really cool branch of vertical farming that is catering to small scale commercial or at home growing, right? So you can get, it looks kind of like a clear glass fridge, but and you can just stick it in one corner of your kitchen, and you can grow your own vegetables in a vertical farm, right? So it has LED lights. You're able to control the environment in that fridge or in that box, and you can grow your own produce. And that's a really cool direction in terms of the technology developing, right? But we partner with a school today, and we bring, we're looking to start bringing kids to our farm and teach them about how food is being grown and this new way of growing food. So it really does depend on understanding your market. It really does. While it doesn't work at small scales, there is a lot of opportunity of combining a lot of these small markets. So all the schools in a local area, all the hospitals in a local area, and achieving scale in that way, in order to help them improve the quality of their produce.
Quick one. Well, basically, one, how can the average person help you guys in particular, help Harvest London in their journey, if they're watching right now?
I'm a big proponent of speaking with your wallet, right? I think one of the reasons that Harvest London is in a position that it is because of people's changing perceptions of what food should be, right? Buying organic where you can, buying local where you can, supporting, local food groups, farmers markets, that sort of thing, rather than just, going into a Tesco and buying a bag of salad, right?
Mhm.
Because so I think that's a very important side of things is unless people change their buying decisions, there aren't going to be these drastic changes in how food is produced. And luckily, most people are starting to go down that path, right?
Yeah.
The organic certification is a funny thing. We feel it's kind of gone down the route of fair trade. You don't actually know what it means anymore, right? When you say organic, as you said earlier, Cameron, organic doesn't necessarily mean pesticide free. It just means organic pesticides. It's still pesticides, right?
Yeah.
So, but there's a lot of research about people's attitudes towards what do they actually look for when they look for an organic thing, right? And it falls into two areas. One is locality. The fact that it's local is very important. When people conflate wrongly, people conflate organic with local. And people also conflate organic with pesticide free, right? So a lot of organizations in my space have started calling themselves post organic, which means, actually it's pesticide free, it's local, and those are the important things. So I think I'm a big proponent of, speaking with your wallet and buying local where you can, buying organic where you can, and just supporting the local food systems. In East London, there are amazing farmers markets, growing. I'm a big proponent of growing communities who handle and manage, go from, managing the actual markets, but they also grow a lot of their own produce. There's actually a 5-minute walk from me, and I volunteer there kind of when I can. And that's not vertical farming at all. That's traditional small hold, just disused space that's been converted with raised beds into productive productive farm. That's it.
And what does Harvest London have in store for this decade of action?
Thanks for that question. That's great. We've been lucky enough to be able to build on the successes that we've had over the last few years. We're actually in the process during quarantine of building another farm. We're building another farm that is going to open around August time, and it's going to cater some of our customers. So really, it's about achieving that vision of a network of farms, right? We see this as the first of our at-scale farms, right? It's really at the scale that we're building now where profitability starts to come in and all of that kind of stuff. It's still a challenge for us because of our age. So it's about achieving that vision of that scale of being able to say, okay, we have multiple farms in and around centers of population. We're also very big proponents, I've touched on some of that R&D of improving or engaging in a lot of that research and development about how to improve yields on the back of it, right? How to improve the taste. We're all used to not very good tomatoes in this country. I would love to be able to grow an Italian quality tomato in East London, for example, right? That would be amazing. So that R&D side of things. And as I said, we're also one of the facts that I didn't raise is 80% of all produce the world consumes is consumed in Asia. So we're very big proponents of, again, templatizing, lifting and shifting. I actually grew up in the Philippines. I'm half Filipino and half English, and I would love to bring this back to Manila. The Philippines is a country that experiences 5 major storms every year, and every time one of those storms comes in, it just decimates the food system. So it'd be great to have it might not necessarily be vertical, but something controlled environment in a glass house that can withstand storms, be able to actually produce food and maintain the food security over the entire year would be an amazing thing to achieve over the next, as soon as I can, at least.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. Yeah, I mean, it's supremely inspiring. And where can we get in touch or locate you guys? How does it work?
Absolutely. So working with chefs and restaurants, Instagram is big. Look us up on harvest.london. We're also going to start, conducting tours, and once the new farm is up, we'll start conducting tours. Find us on our website, harvest.london. Yeah, and support your local restaurants. Hopefully, you'll taste some of our produce with those guys.
That would be phenomenal.
That's what
Seriously.
I was going to ask that, Chris. If they wanted to experience some of Harvest produce, are you able to share which restaurants they can go to?
The big one that's going to start happening in kind of August is Pizza Pilgrims. I know that we all miss fresh pizza. So yeah, go visit your Pizza Pilgrims, your local Pizza Pilgrims, and you'll taste some of our basil.
Love it. Excellent. There's no more questions from the audience, just a lot of appreciation for what you've shared, agreement with the Fiji water comment, which is quite interesting. But most importantly, obviously a lot of level of understanding. There is one more question where they ask, is it easy to create a home system, which maybe they've missed the segment where you did talk about how simple it is to create something like that at home as well, right?
Yeah, it's definitely, it involves a little bit of skill, absolutely, but not beyond there. If you're handy with some DIY stuff, it's absolutely possible. And you'd be surprised at how much you can grow in such a small space.
Do you know what? Maybe that's what you should do. You should have a harvest challenge, build your own.
That sounds amazing. That sounds great, actually.
And then they start supplying you with some of that basil. But no, Chris.
There's lots of YouTube videos of people building their own. There's definitely a DIY nature to some of it, but it's not beyond the realm. I mean, I'm terrible at DIY, but for those that aren't, it's definitely a possibility.
No, absolutely. Well, Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Sincerely.
The work you do is so important for this specific goal, but something we've been seeing with all the talks is addressing one goal by proxy helps you address so many others. And that's something I think everyone in the hub is learning so much more of. Because something I wanted to comment on for everyone is that these sorts of companies are kind of the places where jobs of the future are going to be. So, as much as some of this that we've been discussing throughout the summit still feels quite far away, it's not that far away, and you're seeing that from people like Chris and so many others you heard from. So Chris, thank you so much for contributing to our Climate Action Summit, and hope we can do this again soon. Cameron, any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, just one. Chris, tonight there is a pub quiz which we are hosting for all of you out there and for all of our speakers who are invited. So if you're free tonight at 6, come and test your wits against the others.
I'm great. Terrible at DIY, but pretty good at pub quiz.
Right. And given that in London we're all reopening tomorrow, probably the last night to join some sort of virtual pub quizzy thing. So we'll post some more details in the hub. But yeah, we'd love to get people involved. And yeah, if you're around, Chris, grab a team of 4 and join us.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for your work, Cameron and Namisha, as well, for getting this all done.
It's
all her.
But it's an honor. So thank you guys so much. And yeah, we'll speak to some of you very soon.
All right. Adios. Good luck.
Bye.
Bye.